The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Beatrice Dalton was reaching for a tin of peaches. And she knew in that instant her quiet life in Randsburg, California, was about to change forever. Glass rained down around her like deadly confetti as she dropped to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the dusty main street, accompanied by wild whooping and more gunshots that echoed off the wooden storefronts. She pressed herself against the rough planks of the floor, tasting dust and fear in equal measure as chaos erupted around her. "Everybody stay down," the store owner, Mr. Henderson, shouted from behind his counter. His face had gone pale, making his gray mustache stand out starkly against his skin. "It's the Garrett gang. They've come back." Beatrice had heard the stories. Everyone in Randsburg had heard about the Garrett gang, the ruthless group of outlaws who had been terrorizing mining towns throughout the Mojave Desert for the past 3 years. It was 1897, and while most of California had become relatively civilized, the remote mining towns still attracted the worst kind of men, those who saw opportunity in lawlessness and profit in fear. She risked a glance through the shattered window, her blue eyes widening at the scene before her. 6 riders were circling through the main street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that turned golden in the afternoon sun. They fired their guns into the air, and she could see townspeople scattering like frightened rabbits, diving into doorways and behind water troughs. "Where's your sheriff?" one of the outlaws bellowed. He was a massive man with a scar running down the left side of his face. "Where's the man who thinks he can stand against Colt Garrett?" The sheriff's office remained ominously silent. Beatrice felt her stomach sink. Sheriff Morrison had ridden out that morning with his 2 deputies to investigate a claim dispute at one of the outer mining camps. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Looks like the law's too scared to show his face," another outlaw called out, and the gang erupted in laughter. "That makes this even easier, boys. Let's remind this town who really runs things around here." The outlaws dismounted and began methodically moving from building to building. Beatrice watched in horror as they kicked in the door of the bank across the street. The sound of splintering wood made her flinch. This wasn't just a warning or intimidation. They were planning to take everything. Mr. Henderson crawled over to where Beatrice lay frozen. "Miss Dalton, you need to get out the back. Head to your father's practice and stay there. Lock the doors." Her father, Dr. Edmund Dalton, had his medical practice 2 streets over. At 22, Beatrice had been helping him for the past 4 years, ever since her mother passed from pneumonia. She had steady hands and a quick mind, traits that served her well when assisting with everything from setting broken bones to delivering babies. But right now, those steady hands were trembling. "What about you?" she whispered. "I'll be fine. They want money and supplies, not blood. Just go, quickly now." Beatrice didn't need to be told twice. She crawled toward the back of the store, keeping low as more gunshots rang out. Her practical cotton dress, a simple blue that matched her eyes, caught on a nail and she heard it tear, but she didn't stop. She pushed through the back door and found herself in the narrow alley that ran behind the buildings. The air smelled of horse manure and heated dust. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to orient herself. The sounds of destruction continued from the main street. She could hear glass breaking, men shouting, and underneath it all, the terrified crying of a child. Her heart lurched. That sounded like little Tommy Wells, the blacksmith's son. He was only 5 years old. Beatrice peeked around the corner of the building. The main street was chaos. The outlaws had forced the bank manager to open the safe and were loading bags onto their horses. 2 of them were ransacking the general store now, throwing goods into the street. And there, near the water trough, she saw Tommy, frozen in fear, tears streaming down his dusty face. One of the outlaws noticed the boy and started walking toward him with a cruel grin. Well, what do we have here? Before Beatrice could think better of it, she stepped out from her hiding place. Leave him alone. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, powered by a protective instinct she didn't know she possessed. Every head turned toward her. The outlaw approaching Tommy paused, then his grin widened. Look here, boys. We got ourselves a brave little lady. Beatrice's courage nearly failed her then. The outlaw was massive, with dead eyes and a smell like whiskey and sweat that reached her even from 10 feet away. But Tommy was whimpering behind the water trough, and someone had to do something. The boy hasn't done anything to you, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Just let him go home to his mother. Maybe I will, the outlaw said, taking a step closer to her instead. Maybe I'll trade the boy for something else. What do you say, sweetheart? The implication in his voice made her skin crawl. She took a step back, her mind racing. Where was everyone? Why was no one helping? I said. What do you say? The outlaw reached for her arm. I'd say you should take your hand off the lady. The voice came from behind her, deep and calm, with an undercurrent of steel that made even the outlaw pause. Beatrice turned and saw a man standing in the middle of the street, positioned between her and the gang. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean build that spoke of strength and endurance. He wore dusty trail clothes, simple but well made, a black hat shadowing his face, and a gun belt that sat low on his hips with the ease of long familiarity. Who the hell are you? Colt Garrett himself stepped forward, his scarred face twisted in annoyance. The stranger pushed his hat back slightly, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and intense. His face was weathered by sun and wind but young, probably close to her own age, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble. Name's Bennett James. I'm just passing through. Then pass on through and mind your own business, Garrett said. Bennett James didn't move. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was a readiness in his posture that made Beatrice think of a coiled spring. Can't do that. Lady asked you to leave the boy alone. Seems like a reasonable request. Garrett laughed, but it was a harsh sound without humor. You planning to make us leave, Cowboy? There's 6 of us and 1 of you. I can count, Bennett said. His voice remained level, almost conversational. Question is, which 3 of you want to die today? Because I guarantee you, even if you get me, I'm taking at least 3 of you with me. So who's volunteering? The casual certainty in his voice made several of the outlaws exchange uncertain glances. This wasn't the response they were used to. Most people begged or ran. This stranger was offering them mathematics and death. Beatrice found herself holding her breath. Was he insane? She could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight shift of his weight to the balls of his feet. He meant every word. You got a lot of nerve, Garrett said, his hand drifting toward his gun. I've got a lot of ammunition too, Bennett replied. And I'm a fair hand with it. But here's the thing. You boys have already hit the bank. You've got your money. You can ride out of here right now, rich and alive, or you can push this and some of you won't see sunset. Your choice. We don't take orders from drifters, one of the other outlaws snarled. Not an order. Just information. Bennett's eyes never left Garrett. But while you're deciding, you should know the lady is under my protection now. The boy too. So is anyone else in this town who can't defend themselves. Your protection. Garrett's face darkened with rage. That's right. Bennett took a single step forward, and something in that movement made 2 of the outlaws actually step back. You're protected now, he said, raising his voice so it carried down the street. All of you. These men have their money. They're going to take it and leave. Like hell we are, Garrett started, reaching for his gun. What happened next occurred so fast that Beatrice almost couldn't follow it. Bennett's hand blurred to his hip, and suddenly his revolver was out and firing. The gun in Garrett's hand went spinning away, torn from his grip by a bullet that had to have been aimed with impossible precision. Before the echo of the first shot had faded, Bennett had fired twice more, kicking up dust right at the feet of the two outlaws who were reaching for their own weapons. "Next one won't be a warning," Bennett said. The gun in his hand hadn't wavered even slightly. "Now I've offered you a fair bargain. Take your money and ride. Test me and I promise you'll regret it." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the nervous shuffling of horses and Tommy's continued quiet sobbing. Garrett stared at his empty hand, then at Bennett, and Beatrice could see the calculation in his eyes. The outlaw leader was weighing his pride against his life, and evidently his life won out. "This isn't over," Garrett said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. He turned to his men. "Mount up, we're leaving." "But boss," one of them started. "I said mount up," Garrett snapped. He retrieved his gun from where it had fallen, never taking his eyes off Bennett. "But we'll be back, Cowboy." "You can count on that, and next time we'll bring more men." "I'll be here," Bennett said simply. The outlaws mounted their horses, the bags of stolen money tied to their saddles. Garrett pointed at Bennett with his scarred face twisted in rage. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Won't be the first time," Bennett replied. The gang wheeled their horses around and thundered out of town, heading north toward the hills. The sound of their hoofbeats gradually faded, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the creak of a loose sign in the wind. Beatrice realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out in a rush. Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she had to lean against the wall of the building behind her for support. Tommy scrambled out from behind the water trough and ran crying toward his mother, who had emerged from the blacksmith's shop. Bennett lowered his gun and turned to face Beatrice. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind you got from squinting into the sun over long distances. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin, but it was his eyes that caught her. They were serious and steady, the eyes of someone who had seen too much but hadn't let it break him. "You all right, madam?" he asked. His voice was gentler now, without the edge of steel it had carried moments before. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out shakier than she would have liked. "That was incredibly foolish. You could have been killed." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Could have, wasn't though. 6 against 1. Those are terrible odds. I've faced worse." He holstered his gun with a practiced motion and tipped his hat to her. "Bennett James, at your service." "Beatrice Dalton," she replied automatically. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt an odd mixture of gratitude, admiration, and exasperation. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Mr. James." "Most people figure it's a bit of both," he said, and this time he definitely smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "And it's just Bennett. Mr. James was my father." By now, other townspeople were emerging from their hiding places, gathering in small clusters and talking in excited, nervous voices. Mr. Henderson hurried over, his face flushed. "Young man, I don't know who you are, but you just saved this town a heap of trouble." "Maybe," Bennett said, his expression growing serious again. "But Garrett meant what he said. They'll be back with more men. You folks need to be ready." "We have a sheriff," Beatrice said. "Sheriff Morrison. He's out at the mining camps right now, but he'll be back soon." "One sheriff against the Garrett gang," Bennett shook his head. "You'll need more than that. Are you volunteering?" The question came from Dr. Dalton himself, who had pushed through the crowd. Beatrice's father was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of gentle face that made patients trust him instantly. But right now, his eyes were sharp with concern. Because if that gang comes back in force, we're going to need someone who knows how to handle himself. Bennett looked around at the gathered townspeople, then back at the doctor. I was just passing through. But you stopped, Dr. Dalton pointed out. You could have kept riding, but you didn't. You stood up for my daughter and for this town when no one else did. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. She saw Bennett glance at her, and something passed between them in that look, something she couldn't quite name but felt nonetheless. It was like a spark jumping across a gap, brief but real. "How long until your sheriff returns?" Bennett asked. "Could be today, could be 3 days," Mr. Henderson said. "Depends on how complicated that claim dispute is." Bennett was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he sighed. "I'll stay until he gets back. Make sure Garrett doesn't try anything, but then I need to move on. I've got business elsewhere." "What kind of business?" Beatrice found herself asking. She immediately regretted the question. It was none of her concern what this stranger's business was, but Bennett didn't seem offended. "The kind that doesn't concern good people like yourselves. Let's just say I'm settling some old accounts." There was a shadow in his expression that suggested those accounts were painful ones. Before Beatrice could say anything else, her father intervened. "Well, while you're here, you'll need a place to stay. We have a room above the surgery. It's not much, but it's clean and the bed's comfortable." "I don't want to impose nonsense," Dr. Dalton said firmly. "It's the least we can do. Besides, Beatrice and I could use someone handy with a gun around just in case. We're at the edge of town, one of the first places anyone coming in from the north would pass." "Father," Beatrice protested, "I'm sure Mr. James would prefer the hotel. Actually, your father's right," Bennett interrupted. "If Garrett comes back, he'll likely come from the north. Makes sense for me to be positioned there." He looked at Beatrice, and she saw concern in his gray eyes. "That is, if you don't mind, Miss Dalton, I promise to be a respectful guest." What could she say to that? The man had just risked his life for her in the town. "Of course. You're welcome to stay." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Sheriff Morrison returned with his deputies just as the sun was beginning to lower toward the western hills. He was a stout man with a bristling red beard and a no-nonsense manner. When he heard what had happened, his face went through several shades of red before settling on an angry crimson. "The Garrett gang hit us while I was out." He slammed his fist on his desk. "And where were you, Smits?" This was directed at his senior deputy, a lanky man with nervous eyes. "I was checking the South Road like you told me, Sheriff," Smits said defensively. Meanwhile, 6 outlaws rode right down Main Street and robbed the bank. "Actually, it was this gentleman who drove them off," Dr. Dalton said, gesturing to Bennett. "Bennett James. He stood up to them single-handedly." Sheriff Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Bennett. "That's so. What's your business in Randsburg, Mr. James?" "I was just passing through," Bennett said. His tone was respectful but not deferential. "Seemed wrong to let 6 armed men terrorize innocent people. You any good with that gun, or did you just get lucky?" "I'm good enough," the sheriff grunted. "Well, I suppose I should thank you, though I don't like strangers fighting my battles." "No one's trying to fight your battles, Sheriff," Bennett said evenly. "I did what needed doing, but Garrett said he'd be back with more men. You might want to prepare for that." "I know how to defend my town," Morrison said stiffly. "Didn't look like it this afternoon," Bennett replied, and though his voice remained level, there was an edge to the words. The room went very quiet. Beatrice held her breath, watching the 2 men face each other. Finally, Morrison's shoulders sagged slightly. "You're right. We were caught with our pants down, Won't happen again. He paused. You planning to stick around for a few days? Then I'd appreciate your help. If Garrett comes back, we'll need every gun we can get. I'll deputize you temporary like. Bennett shook his head. I don't want a badge. But I'll help defend the town if it comes to that. Morrison didn't look happy about it, but he nodded. Fair enough. Just stay out of trouble while you're here. That night, Beatrice showed Bennett to the room above the surgery. It was a small space with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dusty street. The walls were plain whitewashed wood, and the furniture was simple but sturdy, built by her father's own hands years ago. I'm sorry it's not fancier, she said, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the modest accommodations. It's perfect, Bennett said, setting his saddlebags down. I've slept in worse places, much worse. There's fresh water in the pitcher and I'll bring you up some supper in a bit. Father's working on a patient right now, but he should be done soon. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not, she said, and meant it. She hesitated at the door, wanting to say something more but not sure what. Mr. James Bennett, what you did today, that was very brave. He turned to face her, and in the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the window, his features seemed softer somehow. I just did what anyone would do. No, she said firmly. Most people would have kept their heads down. You didn't have to get involved, but you did. You protected us. She felt her cheeks warming again. You protected me. Thank you. You're welcome, Miss Dalton. Beatrice, she said. If you're going to call yourself Bennett, then you should call me Beatrice. He smiled at that. All right, Beatrice. The way he said her name, with that slight drawl and the warmth in his voice, made something flutter in her chest. She quickly left the room before he could see her blush deepen. Downstairs, she found her father washing his hands after finishing with his patient, old Mrs. Crawford, who suffered from terrible rheumatism. How is she? Beatrice asked. About the same. I gave her some more of the willow bark tea for the pain. He dried his hands and looked at her with knowing eyes. So, what do you think of our guest? I think he's very capable, Beatrice said carefully, and very mysterious. He mentioned settling old accounts. What do you think he meant by that? Her father considered the question. Men out here have complicated pasts, B. It's not always wise to ask too many questions. What matters is how they act now, not what they've done before. But what if he's done something terrible? What if he's running from the law? Did he seem like a bad man to you? Beatrice thought about the way Bennett had stood between her and danger, the calm authority in his voice when he'd told the outlaws to leave, the gentleness in his eyes when he'd spoken to her. No, he seemed like a good man trying to do the right thing. Then that's all we need to know, her father said. Now, why don't you fix a plate for him? I'm sure he's hungry after the day he's had. Beatrice prepared a generous supper of roasted chicken, potatoes, and the last of the preserved green beans from their garden. She added fresh bread and butter, and on impulse, a slice of the apple pie she'd baked that morning. When she carried the tray upstairs, she found Bennett standing at the window, looking out at the darkening street. He turned when she entered, and she saw he'd washed up. His face was clean-shaven now, revealing a strong jawline and making him look both younger and more vulnerable somehow. He'd also changed into a clean shirt, simple blue cotton that made his gray eyes stand out. I hope you're hungry, she said, setting the tray on the small table by the bed. Starving, actually. He looked at the generous portions and something like surprise crossed his face. This is too much. You've earned it. She found herself reluctant to leave. Mind if I ask where you're from? Bennett settled into the chair and picked up his fork. Texas originally. Little town outside San Antonio, but I've been moving around for a while now. Looking for those old accounts you mentioned, he paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Something like that. His expression grew distant. My parents had a ranch, nothing fancy, but it was home. 3 years ago, a gang came through. They wanted fresh horses and supplies. My father tried to stop them. Beatrice felt her chest tighten. What happened? They killed him. Shot him down in front of the house. My mother too, when she tried to help him. I was out on the back 40 checking fence line. By the time I heard the shots and rode back, it was over. Oh, Bennett, I'm so sorry. The words seemed inadequate, but she didn't know what else to say. I spent the next 2 years tracking them down. There were 5 men in that gang. I found 4 of them. His jaw clenched. The 5th one, the leader, he's proved harder to locate, but I picked up his trail in Arizona. It leads north through California. That's why I'm heading this way. And when you find him. Bennett's eyes met hers, and she saw the darkness there, the pain that had never fully healed. I'll make sure he answers for what he did. Beatrice understood vengeance. She understood how the loss of parents could hollow you out, leave you carrying a weight that never fully lifted. Her mother's death had been to illness, not violence, but the grief was real all the same. And after that, after you've settled this account, he looked surprised by the question, as if he'd never considered there might be an after. I don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe you should, she said softly. Revenge won't bring them back, Bennett. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's true. I know, he said quietly. But I can't just let it go. I can't let him think he can kill good people and get away with it. She nodded, understanding even if she didn't fully agree. Well, while you're here, try to eat and rest. You look like you could use both. His expression softened. Thank you, Beatrice, for the food and the kindness. She left him to his meal and went back downstairs, but her mind stayed on Bennett. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond his good looks and undeniable bravery. Maybe it was the sadness she recognized in him, the same sadness she'd carried since losing her mother. Or maybe it was the way he'd looked at her, really looked at her as if she mattered. Don't be foolish, she told herself. He's just passing through. In a few days he'll be gone and you'll never see him again. But as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself hoping that those few days would last a little longer than expected. The next morning brought clear skies and a dry heat that promised to intensify as the day wore on. Beatrice was helping her father organize his medical supplies when Bennett came downstairs. He'd clearly been up for a while, his hair still damp from washing, his clothes neat despite the trail dust that seemed to be a permanent part of them. "Morning," he said. "Is there anything I can help with around here? I don't like to be idle." "Actually, yes," Dr. Dalton said. "I need to ride out to the Peterson ranch. Their youngest son broke his arm falling off a horse yesterday, and I need to check on how the setting is holding. Would you mind keeping an eye on things here? Beatrice can handle most situations, but it's good to have someone else around." "Father, I'm perfectly capable," Beatrice started. "I know you are, dear. But after yesterday, I'd feel better knowing you had backup, just a precaution." Bennett nodded. "I'd be happy to stay. Take your time." After her father left, an awkward silence fell over the surgery. Beatrice found herself acutely aware of Bennett's presence, the way he seemed to fill the space despite standing quietly by the window. She busied herself with grinding herbs for poultices, but she could feel his eyes on her. "You work with your father often?" he asked finally. "Every day. I've been his assistant for 4 years now." She kept her hands moving, focusing on the rhythmic motion of the mortar and pestle. "I know it's unusual. Most women my age are married with children by now. Why aren't you, if you don't mind me asking?" She did mind a little, but something about the genuine curiosity in his voice made her answer honestly. "There was someone once, Tom Harrison. We were going to be married. But he went off to seek his fortune in the Yukon when gold was discovered there. Said he'd come back for me once he'd struck it rich. Let me guess. He never came back. Oh, he came back. 6 months later with a wife he'd met in Seattle and barely enough money to pay for their passage. Turned out he wasn't much good at finding gold. She tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice. So now I help my father. It's important work and I'm good at it. That's enough. Bennett came closer, leaning against the counter where she worked. He was a fool, Tom, to leave you behind. If a man has something precious, he shouldn't risk losing it for something as uncertain as gold. Beatrice looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. Their eyes met, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. There was something in his gaze, an appreciation and warmth that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "You don't even know me," she said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "I know you're brave. You stepped out to protect a child yesterday when you could have stayed hidden. I know you're kind, the way you took care to make me feel welcome. And I know you're smart, the way you're working with all these medicines like you know exactly what you're doing." He paused. "That's not nothing, Beatrice." Before she could respond, the door burst open and Martha Wells rushed in, carrying little Tommy. The boy was crying, his face flushed with fever. "Miss Dalton, please, he's burning up. Started this morning and just keeps getting worse." Beatrice's training kicked in immediately. She set aside her herbs and moved to examine the boy. "Put him here, Mrs. Wells. Let me take a look." Tommy's skin was indeed hot to the touch, and when she looked at his throat, she could see the telltale redness and swelling. "It's tonsillitis. Probably from all the stress yesterday. Sometimes illness follows fright." She mixed a tonic of honey, lemon, and willow bark. "This will help with the fever and pain. Keep him cool and make sure he drinks plenty of water. If he's not better by tomorrow, come back." "Thank you, Miss Dalton. I don't know what we'd do without you and your father." Martha Wells glanced at Bennett with obvious gratitude. "Or you, Mr. James. Tommy told me how you protected him yesterday. We're all in your debt." After they left, Bennett looked at Beatrice with newfound respect. "You really do know what you're doing. I told you, 4 years of working with sick and injured people teaches you a lot." She washed her hands and returned to her herbs. "Father wants me to go to San Francisco, study at the Women's Medical College there, become a real doctor. Why don't you?" "Because he needs me here, and because—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated mix of fear and longing that kept her in Randsburg. "It's scary. San Francisco is a big city. I've never been anywhere bigger than Bakersfield. Being scared is normal. Letting it stop you, that's the problem." "Is that why you went after those men? The ones who killed your parents, because you refused to let fear stop you?" Bennett was quiet for a long moment. "No. I went after them because I couldn't stand the thought of them being free while my parents were dead. Maybe that was the wrong reason. Maybe I should have just let the law handle it." "Did the law try?" "Not very hard. They were busy with other things. And my parents were just 2 more victims in a territory full of them." Beatrice understood that too. Justice in the West was often rough and incomplete. The law did what it could, but there was too much territory and too few lawmen. "I think you did what you had to do. That doesn't make it wrong. Doesn't make it right either. Maybe some things aren't about right or wrong. Maybe they're just about survival." He looked at her with something like surprise. "That's a hard philosophy for someone as kind as you. Kindness doesn't mean being naive. I've seen enough death and suffering to know the world isn't fair. But I choose to help where I can, because that's what makes life bearable." They worked together in companionable silence after that. Bennett proved handy to have around, reaching supplies from high shelves, moving heavy crates, and generally making himself useful. Beatrice found herself enjoying his presence more than she wanted to admit. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safe even while knowing he was capable of violence. Around noon, they heard the sound of riders approaching. Beatrice felt her heart jump into her throat, but Bennett was already moving to the window, his hand resting on his gun. "It's all right," he said after a moment. "Just some miners coming in from the camps." But the tension in his shoulders didn't fully relax, and Beatrice realized he was constantly on guard, always watching for threats. It must be exhausting living like that. "You ever relax?" she asked. He turned to her with a slight smile. "Not often. Gotten out of the habit, I suppose. That's no way to live. It's kept me alive this long. But what kind of life is it, always looking over your shoulder, always expecting the worst?" Bennett came back to where she stood and surprised her by taking one of her hands in his. His hand was calloused and warm, completely engulfing hers. "You're right. It's no way to live, but I don't know how else to be any more." "Maybe you could learn," she said softly. "If you gave yourself the chance. Maybe." He was still holding her hand, and she noticed he was standing very close now. Close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool interior of the surgery. "Beatrice." The door opened again, and they sprang apart like guilty children. Dr. Dalton entered, looking tired but satisfied. "The Peterson boy is healing well. Should have full use of the arm in a few weeks." He looked between them, and Beatrice was certain her face was bright red. "Everything all right here?" "Fine," Beatrice said quickly. "Mrs. Wells brought Tommy in with tonsillitis. I treated him." "Good, good." Her father set down his medical bag. "Bennett, I appreciate you staying. Any trouble?" "None. Quiet morning." "Well, that's something at least. Though I expect the quiet won't last. Sheriff Morrison is organizing a town meeting tonight. Wants to discuss how to prepare in case the Garrett gang comes back." That evening, nearly everyone in Randsburg crowded into the community hall. The building was simple. Just 4 walls and a roof with benches arranged in rough rows. But it served for everything from church services to social gatherings to meetings like this one. Beatrice sat with her father near the front, and Bennett stood along the back wall with several other men, his eyes constantly scanning the room and the darkened windows. Sheriff Morrison stood at the front, his red beard bristling with agitation. "All right, folks, let's get started. You all know why we're here. The Garrett gang hit us yesterday and they've promised to come back with more men. We need to be ready." "What can we do against a whole gang?" someone called out. "We're miners and merchants, not gunfighters. We can prepare, set up watch posts. Make sure we're not caught off guard again." "Begging your pardon, Sheriff," Mr. Henderson said, standing up. "But watch posts won't help much if they come in force. What we need is more guns, more men who know how to use them. I've sent telegrams to the territorial marshal. They're sending help." "How long will that take?" Dr. Dalton asked. "Days, weeks. Garrett could be back tomorrow." Morrison looked frustrated. "I'm doing what I can with what I have. Unless any of you have a better idea, I might," Bennett said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him. "Garrett has a reputation to maintain. He told this town he'd be back, and now he has to follow through or look weak to other outlaws. That means he'll come back soon, probably within the next few days. But he'll also want to make sure he has enough men to do it right. That takes time to organize." "So how long do you think we have?" Morrison asked. 3 days, maybe 4, a week at most." "And what do you suggest we do with that time?" Bennett looked around the room. "How many men here can shoot?" About 20 hands went up, though several looked uncertain. "Any of you ever shot at something that was shooting back?" Most of the hands went down. Only 4 remained up, 5 including Morrison and his deputies. "That's what I thought," Bennett said. "Sheriff, with your permission, I'd like to spend the next few days training anyone willing to learn basic defense. I'm not talking about making gunfighters, just teaching people how to hold a rifle steady, how to aim properly, how to stay calm under pressure. Morrison looked like he wanted to object on principle, but he was also practical enough to recognize good sense. All right. Anyone interested, meet at the north end of town tomorrow morning. We'll set up some targets. I'll help too, said a voice from the side. A man stood up, older than Bennett but with a similar air of competence. Name's Frank Burgess. I was with the cavalry before I mustered out. I know my way around firearms. Appreciate it, Bennett said. The meeting continued for another hour, covering details about watch schedules and emergency signals. But Beatrice barely heard any of it. She was watching Bennett, seeing how naturally he took charge, how people responded to his calm authority. This was a man who had been through hardship and come out stronger for it. After the meeting, people lingered to talk in small groups. Beatrice found herself approached by several women from town. That Bennett James is quite something, Mrs. Crawford said with a knowing smile. And I don't think he's taken his eyes off you all evening, dear. I'm sure you're mistaken, Beatrice said, but she felt her cheeks warming. I'm old, not blind, Mrs. Crawford said. He's sweet on you, anyone can see it. He's just passing through, Beatrice protested. He'll be gone as soon as the sheriff can handle things on his own. Maybe, or maybe he'll find a reason to stay. The old woman patted her arm. Don't dismiss it out of hand, Beatrice. Good men are hard to find, especially ones who look at you the way he does. Walking home with her father later, Beatrice couldn't help but think about those words. Did Bennett look at her differently? And if he did, what did she want to do about it? He's a good man, her father said, as if reading her thoughts. A bit haunted but good at the core. I've been doctoring long enough to recognize the difference between a man who's done bad things because he's bad, and a man who's done hard things because he had to. What if he leaves and I never see him again? Then you'll have known him for a brief time, and that's better than not knowing him at all. But maybe he won't leave. Maybe he needs a reason to stay, and maybe you're it. Father, that's ridiculous. We barely know each other. Your mother and I knew each other for 3 days before I proposed. Sometimes you just know. Beatrice wanted to dismiss it as romantic nonsense, but she couldn't quite manage it. Because the truth was, she felt something when she was around Bennett, something she'd never felt with Tom Harrison or any other man. It was like standing near a fire on a cold night, that sense of warmth and safety and possibility. The next morning, true to his word, Bennett set up training at the north end of town. Nearly 30 people showed up, men and women both. Beatrice came to watch, telling herself it was just to see what was happening, not because she wanted to see Bennett again. He'd set up targets made from old feed sacks stuffed with straw, arranged at varying distances. Frank Burgess was there too, helping organize people into groups based on experience. All right, folks, Bennett called out. I know most of you are nervous. That's normal. But remember, we're not trying to make you into professional gunfighters. We're just teaching you to defend yourselves and your neighbors if it comes to that. He started with the basics. How to hold a rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. His instructions were patient and clear, and Beatrice watched as people's nervousness gradually gave way to concentration. When he fired his own rifle to demonstrate, every shot hit the center of the target. His competence was both reassuring and a little frightening. This was a man who could kill with ease if he chose to. Miss Dalton, he called out, spotting her in the crowd. Why don't you come try? Oh, I don't think, come on, everyone should know how to protect themselves. Reluctantly, Beatrice came forward. He handed her a rifle and she was surprised by the weight of it. It's heavy. That's why you need to brace it properly. Here, let me show you. He moved behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her grip on the weapon. His closeness made her heart race. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "Now, put the stock firmly against your shoulder," he said, his voice low near her ear. His hands guided hers. "Look down the sight, see that target. Just breathe steady and squeeze slow when you're ready." She tried to focus on the target, but she was intensely aware of every point where his body touched hers. "I can't concentrate when you're standing so close." "Sorry." But he didn't move away. "Beatrice, are you going to let her shoot or just stand there all day?" Frank Burgess called out with obvious amusement. Bennett stepped back quickly, and Beatrice felt both relieved and disappointed. She forced herself to focus on the target, remembering his instructions. Breathe steady. Squeeze slow. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with a boom that startled her, but when she looked downrange, she saw she'd hit the target if not quite the center. "Good shot," Bennett said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Natural talent." "Or a good teacher," she replied, handing the rifle back to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and the contact sent a little jolt through her. The training continued for several hours. By noon, most people were showing marked improvement. The mood was cautiously optimistic. Maybe they really could defend themselves if it came to that. But later that afternoon, that optimism was shattered. One of the deputies came galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up in front of the sheriff's office where Morrison, Bennett, and several others had gathered. "Sheriff," the deputy gasped, "I just came from the Miller Ranch 5 miles north. The Garrett gang hit them last night, burned the house, took everything of value." "Anyone hurt?" Morrison demanded. Miller and his son fought back. "Both dead, Mrs. Miller and the girls managed to hide in the root cellar, but they lost everything." A grim silence fell over the group. This was what the Garrett gang was capable of when they set their minds to destruction. And now they were coming for Randsburg. "How many were there?" Bennett asked. Mrs. Miller says she counted 8 men. Garrett must have picked up reinforcements. 8 against a town of 150 people, Morrison said. "Those odds should favor us." "Should," Bennett said. "But will they? Those are 8 men who are used to killing. We have maybe 20 people who barely know how to hold a rifle straight. Sheriff, you need to send word to the territorial marshal again. Tell them it's urgent. Already planning to. But it'll still take days for anyone to arrive. Then we make do with what we have." Bennett turned to the gathered men. "We need fortifications, barricades at the main approaches to town, safe positions where defenders can take cover, and we need to move the women and children to a central location that's easier to defend." "The church," Dr. Dalton suggested. "It's stone construction, hardest building in town." "Good. Sheriff, have your deputies start organizing that. Frank, you and I will plan the defensive positions. We've got maybe 2 days to get ready." Everyone dispersed to their tasks with grim determination. Beatrice caught Bennett's arm before he could leave. "What about the Miller family? Where will they go? I'll ride out and bring them in. They can stay at the church with everyone else." "I'm coming with you, Mrs. Miller and her daughters will need medical attention, and they might feel more comfortable with another woman present." Bennett looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "All right, but we leave in 10 minutes and you do exactly as I say. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out together, Beatrice sitting her horse with the ease of someone who'd been riding since childhood. Bennett set a hard pace, constantly watching the surrounding landscape for any sign of danger. The Mojave Desert stretched around them, beautiful and deadly, with its creosote bushes and Joshua trees standing like silent sentinels. The Miller Ranch, when they reached it, was a scene of devastation. The house was a blackened skeleton, still smoking in places. The barn had been ransacked, and the bodies of Mr. Miller and his son lay where they'd fallen, covered now with blankets someone had placed over them. Mrs. Miller sat on the ground beside her husband's body, her 3 daughters clustered around her. The oldest couldn't have been more than 14, and the youngest was maybe 8. They all looked hollow-eyed with shock and grief. Beatrice dismounted and went to them immediately. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Beatrice Dalton, Dr. Dalton's daughter. We've come to take you to Randsburg where you'll be safe." "Safe?" Mrs. Miller's laugh was bitter. "Nowhere's safe from men like that. They killed my husband, my boy, and I couldn't do anything." "I know, I'm so sorry." Beatrice knelt beside her. "But your daughters need you now. Let us take you to town. We have food, shelter, and protection." While Beatrice tended to the family, Bennett and one of Morrison's deputies who'd accompanied them wrapped the bodies for transport. It was grim work, but Bennett moved with practiced efficiency. Beatrice found herself wondering how many bodies he'd handled in his pursuit of vengeance. The ride back was somber. Mrs. Miller and her daughters rode in a wagon while Bennett and Beatrice led the way on horseback. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. "Thank you for doing this," Beatrice said quietly. "For helping them. It's what anyone would do." "No, it's not. You didn't have to get involved in any of this. You could have ridden through yesterday and never looked back. But you stayed." "Why?" Bennett was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. I've seen the aftermath, and I swore after my parents died that I'd never be that person, the one who could have helped but didn't." "Is that what drives you?" "Guilt, maybe partly, but also anger. And a need to make some kind of difference, even if it's small, even if it's just protecting one town for a few days." "It's not small," Beatrice said firmly. "Not to the people here, not to me." He looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were soft. "That matters to you, what I do." "Yes," she said simply, because it was true. Somewhere over the past 2 days, Bennett James had become important to her in a way she hadn't expected and couldn't fully explain. "Beatrice, I need you to understand something. When this is over, when Garrett is dealt with one way or another, I have to leave. I have to finish what I started, find that last man and make him answer for what he did. I know. But I want you to know that if things were different, if I wasn't carrying this weight, I'd stay. Because being here, being around you, it's the first time in 3 years I've felt like maybe I could have a normal life again." Her heart clenched at his words. "And after you found this man and settled your accounts, what then? I don't know. I've never thought I'd survive that long, to be honest, never let myself plan for an after." "Maybe you should start," she said, echoing her words from before. "Maybe you should think about what kind of life you want instead of just focusing on revenge." "Is that what you want?" he asked. "For me to come back after?" The question hung in the air between them. Beatrice knew her answer could change everything or nothing, depending on what happened in the next few days. But she also knew she had to be honest. "Yes," she said, "I want you to come back. I know we barely know each other, but I feel like I could know you, really know you, given the chance. And I think you feel the same." "I do," he admitted. "God help me, Beatrice, but I do. You're all I've been able to think about since yesterday. Every time I look at you, I feel like maybe there's hope for me after all." They'd reached the edge of town, so there was no time for more conversation. But as they helped Mrs. Miller and her daughters settle in at the church, Beatrice felt like something had shifted between her and Bennett. An understanding had been reached, a possibility opened up that hadn't existed before. That night, the town was tense with anticipation. Watch posts had been set up at all the main approaches, manned by volunteers working in shifts. Barricades had been built from wagons and timbers, creating defensible positions. The church was filled with women and children, along with anyone too old or infirm to fight. Beatrice stayed at the church. using it as a temporary medical station. She had her father's emergency supplies, bandages and medicines and basic surgical tools. She prayed she wouldn't need them, but experience had taught her to be prepared. Bennett came by around midnight to check on things. He looked tired but alert, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Everything all right here, as all right as can be. How are things outside? Quiet? Too quiet, maybe. I keep expecting them to hit us under cover of darkness, but nothing yet. Maybe they won't come. Maybe they've decided we're too much trouble." "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But I don't think so. Garrett has his pride. He won't back down." They stood together in the doorway of the church, looking out at the darkened street. A half-moon hung overhead, providing just enough light to see by. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "I don't want you out there tomorrow," Beatrice said. "When they come, I have to be. It's what I'm good at, I know. But I don't want to lose you, not when I've just found you." Bennett set his rifle aside and took both her hands in his. "Listen to me. If something happens, if I don't make it through this, I want you to know that these past 2 days have meant more to me than the past 3 years combined. You've reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond revenge." "Don't," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Don't talk like you're not going to make it. I'm not planning to die, Beatrice, but this is the reality of the situation. Men with guns facing other men with guns. Sometimes people don't walk away." She pulled her hands free and gripped the front of his shirt. "Then promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything stupid or noble or heroic. Just survive. That's all I want." "I promise I'll do my best," he said. Then, moving slowly enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, almost tentative, as if he was afraid of pushing too far. But Beatrice leaned into it, rising on her toes to meet him properly. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the two of them. He tasted of coffee and hope and possibilities, and she wanted the moment to last forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over, I'm going to court you properly. Take you to dinners, go for walks, the whole thing. And then I'm going to ask your father for permission to marry you." "That's very presumptuous," she said, but she was smiling. "What makes you think I'd say yes?" "Hope," he said simply. "That's all any of us have, right? Hope that tomorrow will be better than today. Then I have hope too. Hope that you'll survive tomorrow and the day after and all the days that come after. That you'll find what you're looking for and then come back to me." "I will. That's a promise." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, full of all the feelings they hadn't put into words. Then he picked up his rifle and headed back out into the night, leaving Beatrice standing in the doorway with her fingers pressed to her lips, and her heart full of equal parts love and fear. Dawn came too soon and too bright. Beatrice had barely slept, dozing fitfully in a chair near the front of the church. All around her, the women and children of Randsburg slept on bedrolls and benches, making the stone building feel crowded and warm despite the cool morning air. She stepped outside as the sun broke over the eastern hills, washing the desert in shades of pink and orange. It was beautiful, achingly so, and she found herself thinking how unfair it was that such violence could exist in such a beautiful place. Bennett was at the main barricade with Sheriff Morrison and Frank Burgess, checking positions and making last-minute adjustments. When he saw her, he left the others and came over. "You should get back inside," he said. "I will. I just wanted to see you first." She handed him a cloth bundle. "I brought you breakfast. You need to eat." Inside was fresh bread, cheese, and cold chicken. He took it with a grateful smile. "You take care of everyone, don't you? It's what I do." She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him again to be careful, to come back to her, but the words caught in her throat. He seemed to understand. Setting the food aside, he pulled her into his arms, right there in the middle of the street where anyone could see. "I'll be all right. We'll all be all right. You don't know that, no, but I believe it, and sometimes that's enough." A shout from one of the lookouts cut through the morning air. "Riders coming from the north." Bennett released her immediately. "All business now. Get inside, lock the doors. Don't come out until you hear the all-clear signal." Beatrice ran back to the church, her heart pounding. Inside, women were waking, realizing what was happening. Mrs. Miller gathered her daughters close, her face pale but determined. "We survived once. We'll survive again." Through the high windows, Beatrice could see the riders approaching. She counted 8, just as the deputy had reported. They came at a steady pace, not rushing, confident in their numbers and their firepower. Colt Garrett led them, his scarred face set in lines of grim satisfaction. The outlaws pulled up about 100 yards from the main barricade. Garrett's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Well, well, looks like Randsburg is expecting company. That's almost polite of you folks." "You're not welcome here, Garrett," Sheriff Morrison called back. "You've got one chance to turn around and ride out. Or what? You'll shoot us. I count 8 of us and maybe 20 of you, most of whom look like they've never fired a gun at anything but targets. Those odds don't scare me." "Maybe they should," Bennett said, stepping into view. His rifle was held casually, but there was nothing casual about his stance or his voice. "Because you're not facing 20 people with guns. You're facing a whole town that's decided they're not going to let you terrorize them anymore. And that makes all the difference." Garrett's face darkened with recognition and rage. "You again. I told you we'd be back, Cowboy, and I told you I'd be here. Now you've got a choice. You can leave and keep your lives, or you can push this and lose men. Because I guarantee you, even if you win, you won't all walk away." "Is your pride worth dying for?" Big talk from one man. "Not one man," Frank Burgess said, moving to stand beside Bennett. "All of us." One by one, the defenders of Randsburg stood up from behind their barricades, showing themselves. They were shopkeepers and miners, farmers and craftsmen, but in that moment, they were united in their determination to protect their home. Garrett looked around, and for the first time, Beatrice saw uncertainty in his expression. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd thought to find a frightened town, easy prey. Instead, he'd found people ready to fight. "Last chance," Bennett said. "Ride away. There's no shame in choosing to live." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was so thick Beatrice felt like she could have cut it with a knife. Then one of Garrett's men, a younger outlaw with nervous eyes, said, "Boss, maybe we should listen. There's other towns, easier targets." "Shut up," Garrett snarled. But the hesitation was there now, spreading through his gang like a disease. These men were bullies and thieves, used to easy victories. The prospect of a real fight, one where they might actually die, was making them reconsider. "You'll regret this," Garrett said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You hear me? You'll all regret this." "We'll take our chances," Bennett replied. Garrett wheeled his horse around. For a moment, Beatrice thought he was going to charge the barricades anyway, force the issue through sheer stubborn pride. But then he kicked his horse into a gallop, heading north. His men followed, though one or two glanced back with expressions of relief. The town held its breath, waiting to see if this was a trick, if the outlaws would circle back and attack. But the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, and slowly, cautiously, people began to realize it was over. A cheer went up from the defenders. People emerged from behind barricades, laughing and crying and embracing each other with the giddy relief of having survived. Sheriff Morrison shook Bennett's hand vigorously. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Bennett corrected. "All of us together." Beatrice ran from the church, her medical training forgotten in the overwhelming need to see Bennett, to confirm with her own eyes that he was unhurt. He saw her coming and opened his arms, and she threw herself into them without caring who was watching. "You're okay," she gasped. "You're really okay. I promised, didn't I?" He held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I keep my promises, Beatrice." The celebration continued through the morning and into the afternoon. The women and children emerged from the church, and the whole town gathered in the street, sharing food and drink and stories about what had happened. The territorial marshal arrived the next day with a posse of 6 men, ready to help, only to find the situation already resolved. "Looks like you folks handled things just fine without us," the marshal said, a note of approval in his voice. "Garrett and his gang were spotted heading east into Nevada. We'll track them down, but it sounds like they won't be bothering California mining towns anymore. Word will spread about what happened here, how Randsburg stood up to them. That'll make other outlaws think twice." Over the next few days, life gradually returned to normal. The barricades came down, the watch posts were disbanded, and people went back to their regular work. But there was a new sense of pride in Randsburg, a feeling of community that hadn't existed before. Bennett stayed, helping to rebuild what had been damaged and teaching more advanced shooting techniques to those who wanted to learn. He and Beatrice spent every spare moment together, walking through the desert in the cool evenings, sharing stories and dreams and quiet moments that meant more than words. "I need to leave soon," he said one evening as they sat on the porch of the surgery, watching the sunset. "I've stayed longer than I planned already. That trail I was following, it'll go cold if I wait much longer." Beatrice had known this moment was coming, but it still hurt to hear the words. "I know, I won't ask you to stay. I know you need to finish this." "Come with me," he said suddenly. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. "I know it's crazy, and I know we haven't known each other long, but come with me. We could travel together. You'd be safe, I'd make sure of it. And when it's done, when I've settled this last account, we could go anywhere. San Francisco, if you want. You could go to that medical school, become a real doctor. I'd support you in that, help you any way I could." Beatrice's heart leaped at the possibility, but reality quickly asserted itself. "I can't. My father needs me here. The town needs a doctor, or at least someone with medical training. I can't just abandon them." "What about what you need?" Bennett asked gently. "Don't you deserve to follow your dreams?" "Some dreams matter more than others," she said. "Right now, being here, helping people, that matters, and you matter, but I can't go with you, not now. Not while you're still chasing revenge." "Then I'll come back," he said firmly. "I'll finish what I started, and then I'll come back. I'll stay in Randsburg, make a life here, with you if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she whispered. "Today, tomorrow, whenever you come back, I'll be waiting." He kissed her then, sweet and desperate and full of promise. When they broke apart, there were tears on both their faces. Bennett left 3 days later, riding out at dawn. The whole town came to see him off, shaking his hand and thanking him for what he'd done. But it was Beatrice he looked at as he mounted his horse, Beatrice he spoke to with his eyes, even though they'd said everything that needed saying the night before. "I'll come back," he called as he turned his horse north. "I promise. I'll be here," she called back. "I'll be waiting." And then he was gone, a solitary figure riding into the vast emptiness of the desert, carrying her heart with him. The weeks that followed were difficult. Beatrice threw herself into her work, helping her father with an almost frantic energy. She organized the surgery more efficiently, expanded their supply of medicines, and even began teaching some of the town's women basic first aid. Anything to keep busy, to keep from thinking too much about Bennett and where he was and whether he was safe. Letters arrived sporadically. Bennett was tracking his quarry through Nevada and into Idaho, following a trail that was years old but still traceable to someone with his determination. His letters were brief but affectionate, always ending with a reminder that he was coming back to her. Summer turned to fall, and fall to winter. Christmas came, quiet and subdued. Beatrice helped her father tend to miners suffering from cold and injury, the usual ailments of winter in the desert mountains. She thought about Bennett constantly, wondered if he was warm enough, if he was eating properly, if he was still alive. Then, in early March, a letter came that was different from the others. Bennett had found his man, tracked him to a mining camp in Montana. By the time Beatrice received the letter, it would all be over, one way or another. She read that letter a dozen times, trying to read between the lines to understand what Bennett was feeling. There was a weariness in his words, a sense that he was tired of hunting, tired of anger, tired of carrying this weight. But there was also determination. He would see this through, and then he would be free. 2 weeks passed with no word. Beatrice tried to stay hopeful, but fear gnawed at her constantly. What if something had gone wrong? What if he'd been killed? She'd have no way of knowing, no one to notify her. She'd just never hear from him again, left to wonder and worry for the rest of her life. Then, on a bright afternoon in late March, a rider appeared at the edge of town. Beatrice was in the surgery, grinding herbs, when she heard the excited voices outside. She stepped to the window and saw a familiar tall figure dismounting from a dusty horse. Bennett. She didn't remember running outside, didn't remember crossing the street. One moment she was at the window, the next she was in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. He held her tight and she could feel him trembling. "You came back," she said, the words muffled against his chest. "You really came back, I promised," he said hoarsely. "It's done, Beatrice. It's finally done." He looked different, thinner, more worn, with lines of exhaustion around his eyes. But there was also a lightness in his expression that hadn't been there before, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "What happened?" she asked. "I found him, tracked him to a mining camp in Montana. He changed his name, was working as a guard for one of the big operations there." Bennett's jaw clenched. "When I confronted him, he didn't even remember my parents. 3 years I've been hunting him, and he didn't even remember killing them. It was just another robbery to him, another forgotten moment in a life full of violence." "Did you kill him?" she had to know. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. "No, I turned him in to the territorial marshal. He'll stand trial for murder. It seemed more fitting somehow. He took my parents' lives, so I took his freedom. Let him rot in prison for what he did." "I'm proud of you," Beatrice said. "That took more courage than killing him would have. It took remembering what my parents would have wanted. They were good people, peaceful people. They wouldn't have wanted me to become a killer, even in their name." He cupped her face in his hands. "You helped me remember that. Your words, your kindness, the way you see the good in people. You reminded me who I used to be, who I could be again. What will you do now?" "Well, I was hoping to settle down, maybe in a nice little mining town in California, make a life there. Court a beautiful woman with blue eyes and a kind heart. Marry her if she'll have me. Raise a family. Grow old. All the boring, wonderful things I thought I'd never get to do." Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears now. "That sounds perfect." Bennett pulled a small box from his pocket. "I stopped in San Francisco on the way here, spent most of my remaining money on this." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It's not much, but it's perfect," she interrupted. "Everything about this is perfect." "I haven't asked the question yet," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the street with half the town watching. "Beatrice Dalton, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, not even hesitating. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the gathered townspeople cheered and applauded. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing, her father stepped forward. "I suppose I should object to my daughter being proposed to in the street like some kind of spectacle," Dr. Dalton said, but he was smiling. "But since I've been hoping for this for months, I'll just say welcome to the family, Bennett." The wedding was held 6 weeks later, giving Beatrice time to prepare and the town time to plan a proper celebration. It seemed like everyone in Randsburg contributed something. Mrs. Crawford made the cake, an impressive 3-tiered confection. The blacksmith crafted a beautiful wrought iron arch for them to stand under. The women of the town sewed Beatrice a dress of white lace that made her feel like a princess. The ceremony was held at the church, the same building where people had sheltered during the threat of the Garrett gang. It seemed fitting somehow to celebrate love in a place that had witnessed fear and courage in equal measure. Beatrice walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked on Bennett waiting for her at the altar. He wore a new suit, black and formal, and he looked more handsome than she'd ever seen him. But it was the expression on his face that made her heart soar. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he couldn't believe his luck. The vows were traditional, but they'd added their own promises. Bennett promised to always protect her, to support her dreams, to be her partner in all things. Beatrice promised to stand by his side, to help him build a peaceful life, to love him in good times and bad. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Bennett pulled her close and kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the audience were dabbing at their eyes. The reception was held in the community hall, transformed for the occasion with wildflowers and ribbons. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and a joy that permeated everything. Even Sheriff Morrison, not known for his sentiment, offered a toast to the happy couple. "To Bennett and Beatrice," he said, raising his glass. "May they have a long and peaceful life together. And may we never need saving again. But if we do, may we always have the courage to stand together like we did that day." "Hear, hear," the crowd echoed. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Bennett pulled Beatrice outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the porch of the community hall, looking up at the stars that blazed across the desert sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she said. "A year ago I thought my life was set. I'd be my father's assistant forever, helping people but never really having a life of my own. And then you rode into town and changed everything." "You changed me too," he said. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, living for revenge, not really living at all. You showed me there was more, that I could have a future beyond anger and pain." "What kind of future do you want?" she asked. "This kind. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. I want to build something, Beatrice. Maybe a ranch, nothing huge, just enough to keep us comfortable. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work side by side during the day. I want children someday, to teach them to be good and kind like you, strong and brave when they need to be." "That sounds wonderful," she said. "All of it. Though I should tell you, I plan to keep helping Father with his practice, at least until he can find another assistant or I can't manage both. I wouldn't have it any other way. Your healing work is part of who you are. I'd never ask you to give that up." They stood in comfortable silence, holding each other, planning their future with words and with the language of touch and presence. Inside, the celebration continued, but out here, under the stars, it was just the two of them and the vast open possibility of their life together. True to his word, Bennett bought a small ranch about 3 miles outside of town. It wasn't much, just a modest house and enough land for a few horses and cattle, but it was theirs. He proved to be a hard worker, up before dawn and working until dusk, building their home into something they could be proud of. Beatrice split her time between the ranch and the surgery, riding into town several times a week to help her father. Bennett never complained about her absences, understanding that her work was important to her. On the days she was at the ranch, they worked together, building corrals and planting a garden and slowly transforming the property into a real home. Their first year of marriage was filled with small joys and challenges. They learned each other's rhythms, how to work together and live together. There were disagreements, of course, moments when they didn't see eye to eye. But they learned to talk through problems, to compromise, to remember that they were partners in all things. Bennett became a fixture in Randsburg, respected and liked by everyone who knew him. He helped out when people needed it, whether it was repairing a roof or tracking down lost livestock. He never wore his gun in town anymore, that part of his life firmly in the past. But everyone remembered what he'd done, how he'd stood up to the Garrett gang and inspired the town to stand with him. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a mixture of joy and terror. Bennett became almost comically protective, worried about her riding into town, about her lifting anything heavier than a book, about everything that could possibly go wrong. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Beatrice told him one day, laughing at his hovering. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "I know, but you're not just any woman. You're my woman, and I can't help worrying." "Then worry quietly and let me work," she said, but she was smiling. His protectiveness was annoying but also endearing. Their son was born in early December, a healthy baby boy with Bennett's gray eyes and Beatrice's dark hair. They named him Edmund, after Beatrice's father, but called him Eddie. Bennett held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "A family of my own. After everything that happened, I thought that chance was gone forever." "But you do have it," Beatrice said from the bed, exhausted but happy. "You have us and we have you. We're a family now." Watching Bennett with their son over the next months was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, singing lullabies in his surprisingly decent voice, walking the floor with Eddie when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. All the hardness that had been in him when they first met had softened, replaced by a tenderness that made Beatrice love him even more. The years passed in a pleasant blur. Eddie grew into a bright, energetic boy, and when he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Clara. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they called Thomas. Their house was filled with noise and laughter, with the organized chaos of a growing family. Dr. Dalton grew older but remained sharp as ever, and when Eddie was 10, Beatrice finally convinced her father to consider retirement. "I've been training long enough," she told him, "and there's a young doctor fresh from medical school back east who's looking for a place to practice. Between the two of us, we can handle the town's medical needs." "You're sure?" her father asked. "I don't want to leave you overwhelmed." "I'm sure." "You've earned your rest, father. Spend time with your grandchildren. Read all those books you've been saving. Let someone else handle the midnight emergencies for a change." So Dr. Dalton retired, and Beatrice took over as Randsburg's primary medical practitioner, working alongside the new doctor, an earnest young man named Peter Wright. She was good at the work, better than she'd even realized, with an intuitive understanding of illness and injury that served her patients well. Bennett supported her completely, taking on more of the household duties and childcare to free her up for her practice. Their children grew up healthy and happy. Eddie showed an interest in ranching and worked alongside his father, learning how to care for livestock and manage the land. Clara was quieter, more bookish, always asking questions about everything. Thomas was the daredevil, constantly climbing things he shouldn't and giving his parents heart attacks with his fearless antics. One evening, when Eddie was 15 and starting to look disturbingly like a young version of his father, the family sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the desert. Clara was reading aloud from a book about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Thomas was whittling something that might have been a horse, and Eddie was mending a saddle. "Father," Clara said, looking up from her book, "Mother told us how you and she met, but she said there was more to the story. About why you came to Randsburg in the first place." Bennett glanced at Beatrice, who nodded slightly. Their children were old enough now to hear the full truth. "I came to Randsburg because I was tracking a man," Bennett said, "a very bad man who had hurt my family years before." "Did you find him?" Eddie asked. "Eventually. It took years, but I found him." "What did you do?" Thomas wanted to know. "I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else, and then I let him go in a way. Let go of the anger I'd been carrying around because I'd found something more important." "Mother," Clara said, smiling. "Your mother," Bennett agreed. "And this life we've built together, all of you. If I'd been so focused on revenge that I'd ridden past Randsburg that day, I would have missed out on everything that really matters." "That's very philosophical," Eddie said, grinning. "Doesn't sound like the same man who faced down 6 outlaws with just a gun and some nerve." "People change," Bennett said. "Or maybe they just remember who they always were, underneath the pain and anger. Either way, I'm grateful every day that I stopped in Randsburg, that I met your mother, that I got the chance to have this life." Beatrice reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We're grateful too." The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew up and began making their own paths in the world. Eddie took over management of the ranch, expanding it gradually through smart purchases and hard work. He married a girl from Bakersfield, a practical young woman named Alice who fit perfectly into the family. Clara went to San Francisco to attend medical school, following in her mother's footsteps. She wrote long letters home about her studies, about the new techniques she was learning, about the fascinating cases she observed. Beatrice read these letters with pride, knowing her daughter was living the dream she herself had once had. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, joined the cavalry and was stationed at various forts throughout the West. His letters were sporadic but always exciting, full of stories about chasing horse thieves and exploring uncharted territory. When Bennett turned 50, Beatrice threw him a surprise party. Half the town showed up, including several people whose lives he'd touched over the years. Sheriff Morrison, now retired and grayer but still spry, gave a speech about the day Bennett had faced down the Garrett gang. "That was almost 30 years ago," Morrison said, "but I remember it like yesterday. This young man rode into town, and when trouble came, he didn't run. He stood his ground and inspired all of us to do the same. Randsburg is a better place because Bennett James decided to stop here instead of riding on through." Bennett, embarrassed by the attention, tried to deflect. "I just did what needed doing. Any of you would have done the same." "But we didn't," Frank Burgess said. He was older now too, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp. "You did. You stood up first and the rest of us followed. That takes a special kind of courage." Later, after the party had wound down and they were alone, Bennett and Beatrice sat on their porch, the same place they'd sat countless times over the years. The ranch looked good in the moonlight, solid and prosperous, a testament to decades of hard work. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked. "Stopping here, giving up your search?" "Never," Bennett said firmly. Not for a single moment. This life we've built together, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Every morning I wake up grateful, and every night I go to bed content. That's more than most people can say." "I'm grateful too," Beatrice said, "for all of it, for the life we've made, for our children, for growing old with you." "We're not that old," Bennett protested. "We're not that young either," she said, laughing. "But I wouldn't change a thing, not the hard times or the good times. All of it led us here, to this moment, to this life. And it's been a good life, Bennett. A very good life." He pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Eddie and Alice talking, planning their own future. The ranch would be in good hands when they were gone. More years passed. Grandchildren arrived, and Bennett proved to be as devoted a grandfather as he'd been a father. He taught the grandchildren to ride, to rope, to respect the land and the animals. He told them stories about the old days, though he always glossed over the violent parts, focusing instead on the courage and community he'd witnessed. Clara returned from San Francisco with a medical degree and set up practice in Randsburg alongside her mother. Together, they formed a formidable team, providing medical care that was unusually advanced for a small mining town. Beatrice was proud beyond words to work beside her daughter. Thomas eventually left the cavalry and settled in Montana, where he bought a small ranch and married a local girl. His letters continued to arrive, now full of stories about farming and fatherhood instead of military adventures. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Beatrice back to the spot where he'd first stood against the Garrett gang. The town had erected a small plaque there, commemorating the event, though Bennett had objected strenuously when they'd proposed it. "This is where it all started," he said. "Where I saw you for the first time trying to protect that little boy. I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen." "I was terrified," Beatrice admitted, "but I couldn't just let them hurt a child. That's what bravery is. Being scared but doing what's right anyway." He took both her hands in his. "You've been my example all these years. Whenever I faced something difficult, I thought about your courage that day, and it gave me strength." "We've given each other strength," Beatrice said. "That's what love is, I think. Not just the grand gestures and passionate moments, but the everyday support, the knowledge that someone has your back no matter what." "Through everything," Bennett agreed. "You've been my partner, my best friend, my true love. I couldn't have asked for more." They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The town of Randsburg bustled around them, prosperous and peaceful, a far cry from the frightened place it had been when they first met. In their later years, Bennett and Beatrice gradually handed over more responsibilities to the younger generation. Eddie managed the ranch full-time, making decisions about breeding and expansion. Clara took over Beatrice's medical practice completely, with her mother serving as an advisor and backup when needed. Bennett and Beatrice spent more time traveling, visiting Thomas in Montana, and taking trips to San Francisco to attend medical conferences with Clara. They saw the world slowly changing around them, the frontier becoming more civilized, the wildness that had defined their youth gradually fading. But Randsburg remained their home, and the ranch was where they always returned. It was filled with memories, good and bad, joyful and sorrowful. The porch where they'd courted, the bedroom where their children had been born, the barn where Bennett had taught Eddie to ride. Every corner held a story, a piece of the life they'd built together. On a warm spring evening, when Bennett was 72 and Beatrice 70, they sat on that same porch one more time. Their children and grandchildren were visiting, filling the house with noise and laughter. Eddie's children were grown now, with children of their own. The family had expanded in ways they'd never imagined. "Can you believe we've been doing this for almost 50 years?" Beatrice asked, leaning against Bennett's shoulder. "Some days it feels like just yesterday I rode into town. Other days it feels like I've known you forever." He wrapped his arm around her. "Either way, I'm grateful for every moment. Even the hard times, especially the hard times. They taught us how strong we could be together. Anyone can be happy when things are easy. It's facing the difficulties together that really tests a marriage." Inside, they could hear Clara telling her children about the history of Randsburg, about the day their grandfather had faced down a gang of outlaws. The story had become family legend by now, growing slightly with each retelling, though the core of it remained true. "They're going to remember us," Beatrice said. "Long after we're gone, they'll tell stories about the cowboy who saved the town and the doctor who healed it." "I hope they remember more than that," Bennett said. "I hope they remember that we loved each other, that we built something good, that we tried to make the world a little better than we found it." "They will," Beatrice assured him. "Because that's the most important part of the story, not the violence or the drama, but the love. That's what lasts, what really matters." Bennett kissed the top of her head, and they sat together as the sun set one more time over the desert they'd called home for half a century. Inside, their family laughed and talked, carrying on the legacy they'd built. The ranch would continue, the medical practice would continue, the family would continue. They'd created something that would outlast them, something good and true. "I love you, Beatrice," Bennett said softly. "From that first moment in the street to this moment right here, you've been the best part of my life." "I love you too," she replied. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in perfect contentment. The outlaws had threatened the town all those years ago, and Bennett had stood guard and promised protection. But what he'd really protected was the possibility of love, of family, of building something lasting in a wild and uncertain world. And they had built it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. The story that had begun with violence and fear had transformed into something beautiful, a life filled with purpose and meaning and love. Bennett and Beatrice lived well into their 80s, blessed with good health and the constant presence of family. When Bennett finally passed, peacefully in his sleep, Beatrice was beside him, holding his hand just as she'd done for 60 years of marriage. She followed him 2 years later, having lived long enough to see her great-great-grandchildren born, to know that the family they'd started would continue for generations to come. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a pair of oak trees that Eddie had planted decades before. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their births and deaths, along with a single line that Beatrice had requested. "Together in life, together forever." The town of Randsburg mourned their passing, but it was a gentle mourning, tempered by gratitude for the lives they'd lived and the example they'd set. A memorial service drew people from 3 states, all of them with stories to tell about how Bennett and Beatrice had touched their lives. Clara spoke at the service, her voice steady despite her grief. "My parents taught us that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's standing up to outlaws with a gun. Sometimes it's opening your heart to love after loss. Sometimes it's simply choosing, day after day, to be kind and to do what's right." They lived those lessons every day of their lives, and they taught us to do the same. Years later, when historians began documenting the history of the American West, they would come across the story of Randsburg and the day a cowboy named Bennett James faced down the Garrett gang. They would interview the descendants, read the old newspaper accounts, and piece together what happened. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was never about violence or gunfights. It was about a man who found redemption, a woman who found love, and two people who built a life together that became a legacy. It was about choosing hope over despair, love over revenge, community over isolation. The ranch continued to thrive under Eddie's management and later his children's. The medical practice that Beatrice had helped establish continued to serve Randsburg for generations, with Clara's descendants following in her footsteps. Thomas's family grew and prospered in Montana, always remembering their roots in California. And on warm spring evenings, when the desert bloomed and the sky turned gold with sunset, you could still feel their presence on that porch. Two people who'd loved each other against all odds and created something beautiful in a harsh and unforgiving land. The outlaws had threatened the town, and the cowboy had stood guard and said, "You're protected now." But what he'd really been protecting was the future, the possibility that love could triumph over hate, that peace could follow violence, that two broken people could find each other and become whole. That was the real story of Bennett and Beatrice James. Not just a tale of the Old West, but a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to create meaning in the midst of chaos, to build something lasting from the ashes of loss. Their great-great-grandchildren still tell the story, passing it down through the generations. They speak of the outlaw gang and the brave cowboy, of the doctor's daughter who believed in him, of the life they built together in Randsburg, California, in the final days of the American frontier. But more than that, they tell a love story. Because in the end, that's what it always was. Two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose love over fear, hope over despair, and built a legacy that would outlast them by generations. A reminder that even in the wildest places, in the most uncertain times, love can flourish and create something beautiful that will endure forever. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of the desert they once called home, under the endless sky and eternal stars, the story of Bennett and Beatrice continues, whispered on the wind, remembered in the land they loved, and lived through the family they created together. The cowboy and his bride together always, their love a beacon lighting the way for all who came after. The end.